Listen up, girl. I'm your host, Zach Randles-Friedman, and I am bringing you LGBTQ plus news as quickly as I can and often as needed. Today is Saturday, October 4th, and we have a ton of news to get to. So our first story is military warrior ethos speech. At Quantico, Secretary of Department Pete Hegseth told a room of generals and senior officers that the U.S. military needs what he called a warrior ethos reset. Hegseth outlined new rules requiring daily fitness training, stricter grooming standards, and male-level combat thresholds for all service members. He also announced the end of programs as he described as distractions, saying there would be no more identity months, DEI offices, or dudes in dresses. Yes, he actually said this in front of a room full of generals they flew from all over the world. The remarks sparked immediate backlash from civil rights groups and LGBTQ plus advocates who say his comments openly demean transgender troops and erase decades of work towards inclusion in the armed forces. Critics also pointed out that Hegseth, who has long waged culture war battles on cable news, has shown more focus on fighting diversity programs than addressing real-world security challenges. Advocacy groups argue that this type of rhetoric undermines morale, especially for LGBTQ plus service members who already face higher rates of harassment and mental health challenges. And that was reported by AP and MSNBC. What's crazy to me is that these people that are part of the LGBTQ plus community give as much as the cisgender people. So why is he coming down on them? Why is he focusing on this when we have a war that's happening in Palestine and Israel, when we have a war that's happening in Ukraine and with Russia? We have all these other major things happening, and he's worried about DEI programs? I think his priorities are in the wrong place, but that's just my opinion. Next, FBI flag controversy. FBI Director Kash Patel is under fire for terminating an agent in training who displayed a small rainbow pride flag on his desk last year. Patel wrote that the trainee had exercised poor judgment and engaged in an inappropriate display of political signage. The firing comes at a time when the Bureau, like many agencies, is already facing scrutiny for how it treats LGBTQ plus employees. Civil rights organizations have condemned the move as discriminatory, equating a pride flag with political propaganda stigmatizes identity itself. Former FBI officials noted that such disciplinary action was unprecedented, especially given that personal item on desk, from religious symbols to sports memorabilia, are rarely scrutinized in this way. Advocates argue that the decision reflects a broader effort by the Trump administration to roll back diversity and inclusion initiatives within federal service, reported by MSNBC. Next, we have LGBTQ plus youth suicide hotline services. As we all know, in July, the Trump administration quietly cut the LGBTQ plus specific services from the 988 suicide prevention hotline. Previously, LGBTQ plus youth who called were routed to counselors specifically trained to understand the unique challenges queer and trans people face. That service has now been eliminated, and calls are handled without dedicated support. Advocates say the change is life-threatening. LGBTQ plus teens are more than 4 times as likely than their peers to attempt suicide, according to the Trevor Project. The removal of specialized services has left many parents, educators, and community leaders alarmed. In response, Senators Tammy Baldwin, a Democrat from Wisconsin, and Lisa Murkowski, a Republican from Alaska, introduced bipartisan legislation this week to restore those crisis lines. Both senators argue that young mental health should transcend politics, with Murkowski adding that saving lives must become before any culture war. The bill future is uncertain, but has already drawn attention as rare bipartisan response to Trump's rollback. That was reported by NBC News, and I love it that there is a bipartisan bill coming out to support the LGBTQ plus community. One step forward. Let's take what we can get. Domestic violence in LGBTQ plus communities. So domestic violence affects LGBTQ plus people at alarming rates, but the issue is rarely acknowledged in mainstream conversations. A CDC study shows that 26% of gay men and 37.3% of bisexual men have experienced intimate partner violence, compared with roughly 29% of heterosexual women. Experts say stigma, underreporting, and lack of targeted resources mean the problem is even bigger than the numbers suggest. Advocates warn that societal stereotypes often prevent male survivors from being taken seriously. Many shelters and services were built with heterosexual women in mind, leaving LGBTQ plus survivors unsure of where to turn. The National Domestic Violence Hotline is working to raise awareness that abuse can happen in any relationship. Anyone who needs support to text START to 88788. They stress that abuse is about power and control, not gender or orientation, and that no one deserves to feel unsafe in their own home. Next, ICEBlock app removed by Apple. This is so sad to read. But Apple has removed ICEBlock, a popular app that alerted users to nearby ICE activity, from its app store. The removal came after months of pressure from the Trump administration, which argued the app endangered federal agents and undermined immigration enforcement. ICEBlock was widely used in immigration communities, helping families avoid raids and warning activists about enforcement patterns. In a letter to the app developer, Apple claimed the program violated guidelines on defamatory, discriminatory, or mean-spirited content. Critics say the move sets a dangerous precedent as tech companies bending to political pressure, especially when it comes to tools that vulnerable communities rely on. Immigration advocates have accused Apple of siding with authoritarian tactics rather than protecting free expression and community safety. For many immigrants, the removal represents yet another blow in an already hostile climate. That was reported by CNBC and The Verge. Next, art groups win against anti-trans order. In Rhode Island, a federal judge has handed a victory to arts organizations challenging a Trump administration order that sought to ban funding for projects seen as promoting gender ideology. Earlier this year, the National Endowment for Arts began requiring all applicants to check a box certifying that federal funds would not be used for gender ideology following Trump's January executive order. Judge William Smith ruled that the requirement was unconstitutional, violating both free speech protections and the Administrative Procedure Act. The decision frees arts organizations from a chilling rule that could have jeopardized funding for theater productions, museum exhibits, or educational programs that include transgender themes. Advocacy groups say the ruling is a reminder that attempts to legislate LGBTQ plus identities out of public life will continue to face legal challenges, and they argue constitutional defeat. Next, we go to Japan, where Japan expands LGBTQ plus legal protections. The Japanese government has taken another step forward in recognizing same-sex couples by expanding legal protections under 9 additional laws, including those covering disaster relief payments and child abuse prevention. This builds on the earlier reforms that extended protections under 24 laws, such as Domestic Violence Prevention Acts and Public Housing Act. Marriage equality remains off the table as Japan's constitution explicitly defines marriage between both sexes. But advocates see these moves as a sign of growing momentum, especially as polling shows younger generations overwhelmingly supporting equality. Advocacy groups say that while piecemeal recognition is no substitute for full marriage rights, every expansion helps dismantle systematic barriers and provides tangible relief for LGBTQ plus families. And that was reported by the Japan Times. Next, Scottish schools and trans students. Scotland has issued new guidance requiring schools to provide separate toilets for boys and girls on the basis of biological sex. The policy comes after the UK Supreme Court ruled that legal definition of a woman is restricted to sex assigned at birth. The guidance replaces earlier policies that allowed trans students to use facilities aligned with their gender identity. Schools are now being asked to consider adding gender-neutral options, but critics say this is a step backward for transgender youth. Advocacy groups argue that forcing trans students into separate categories isolates them and increases the risk of harassment. Teachers have warned that the shift could further stigmatize already vulnerable students and doing years of work towards making schools safer and more inclusive, reported by the BBC. And our final story is very disturbing. Adelita Grijalva's swearing in is delayed. Arizona Congresswoman-elect won a special election in her state's 7th district last week, has yet to be sworn in. Speaker Mike Johnson says the swearing in will happen when the White House reconvenes, but Democrats point out that 2 Republican members earlier this year were sworn in immediately, even while the House was out of session. Grijalva, the daughter of longtime Arizona Congressman, said the delay leaves her constituents without representation at a critical moment. Democrats accused Johnson of deliberately stalling Grijalva's vote, which could tip the balance on the petition to release sealed Justice Department files related to Jeffrey Epstein. She would provide the final signature needed to force a vote. It is unfair for the people I represent, she told Associated Press. They deserve a voice and they deserve a vote. That was reported by AP and by PBS. And that's my news for today on Saturday, October the 4th. Thanks so much for joining, and talk with you tomorrow with more LGBTQ plus news.